Do you have a story to share with the world? Of course you do. We all have stories to share. An Anchor podcast allows you to share your interests in a way that connects to others all across the globe. If you have been considering starting your own podcast and don't know where to begin, Anchor makes it easy to record, edit, and publish with the click of a button. You can even add music. Whether it's crime dramas, self-improvement, paranormal adventures, or tips about parenting, you too can share your unique imprint on the world. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. You've got this. I believe in you. Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tools and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively. So in today's podcast, I am really excited because we're going to touch on a topic that has kind of been a part of my life to a certain extent. Many of you who have listened to my podcast are aware that I worked around death and loss and grief for many, many years. And I was able to see death or people passing. And at the time, I didn't really recognize what was happening. But as I have learned and grown through this process and understanding a little bit deeper of my intuitive empath abilities, I was able to kind of hone in a little bit more on what I was actually experiencing. So today, we are going to dive a little bit deeper into what is known as a near-death experience. And I have Ryan Gardner here with me. He is a certified master life coach with Blue Moments Coaching, and he is also a near-death experiencer. So welcome to the show, Ryan.
Yes, thank you, Tanya. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, so I had reached out to several people asking for some near-death experiences because this is a fairly new sort of topic for me a little bit because I haven't really personally experienced a near-death experience. However, working in death and loss for all of those years, I was there to witness or observe others who had lost consciousness or were in the act of being resuscitated and coming back to life. And I also had many transplant recipients that I worked with that had lost consciousness and come back to life as well. So I've heard several stories, but I love to be able to kind of collect all of those stories and see what, similarities and differences amongst, all the different people who've had these experiences. So why don't we dive right into your experience and, kind of hear what you went through from your perspective, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, so sure, I would say it definitely does not happen to many people. And those, at least from my perspective, that it does happen to, it was a blessing. It was absolutely beautiful and very peaceful. I was in a car accident in 2001, and I was ejected from the sunroof of a vehicle that was traveling roughly 90 miles an hour. And it was spinning in the air. I came out the sunroof and I hit the ground. I laid there for about 45 minutes before anybody found me. And when I was found, I did not have any vital signs. I had spinal fluid coming from my ears. I had raccoon eyes, which was indicative, of a head injury.
Of course.
So I was just kind of picked up and put on the helicopter. And I do remember hearing sounds of the helicopter, but not much after that. So I do have very specific memories in that experience. The next thing I remember was having an aerial view looking down into a room. And this room was very white. It was bright. It was clean. And there was a bed in the middle of the room. And surrounding the bed were a lot of people in scrubs, in green. And I remember looking down and watching what was happening. And they were very frantic. They were moving around. So I'm observing from above, but I'm actually hearing from below as though I'm on the bed, but I'm witnessing it from up here, but hearing it from down there.
Interesting.
There was a lot of yelling, a lot of screaming. It was very methodical chaos.
Uh-huh.
I didn't feel any pain. And from that point, I'm not really sure. I know from what the hospital staff told me is I was then taken into the intensive care unit. And I spent 6 weeks comatose.
Wow.
And during that 6 weeks, there's really one thing that really stands out as far as my experience with it. And what happened was I remember being in a cylindrical room, and on the walls was cobblestone. And I couldn't see any light above. I couldn't see any light below. It seemed like it was a dirt floor. And in front of me was a figure. I'm going to call this an angel.
Mm-hmm.
Long blonde hair. I never saw her face, just her hair. And she was glowing. She was really the only light in the room. And off behind her was a wooden staircase that went up to a platform where there was a door. And standing on that platform, I could see a lot of silhouettes. Some were adults, some were children. I couldn't identify them. I don't know who they were. But while I was standing in front of this figure, I was extremely peaceful. There was no pain. I mean, clearly my body was beat up. I had sustained a head injury. I broke all my ribs, punctured and collapsed both my lungs, broke my back, broke my arm. There was all kinds of, physical issues going on with me, but I felt none of it. And emotionally, I don't even know if I can describe it as emotions. It was more of just a state of being.
Uh-huh.
And standing there was no verbal communication between me and this angel sitting at this desk in front of me. There was no eye contact made, but there was communication that was happening to where I was given a choice. Ryan, do you want to stay? Do you want to go back to Earth and do whatever it is that you've been called to do? Or are you ready to let go? And either one is okay. You can choose either direction. And there was no fear in me with either choice. It was just kind of all right. And without speaking anything, I clearly made my choice.
Mm-hmm.
Come back. After that, I go blank.
Interesting.
There's nothing that really happens for me personally that happened after that. But my choice was to come back. And it was, I was told that it would be an uphill battle. There would be a lot of fight to get back. And I know that had a lot to do with just my circumstances when I came out of this coma, and now I'm broken. I've got a broken body. I'm emotionally drained. Where am I going to go from here? But I wasn't afraid of that.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, I'm ready for that, whatever that looks like. I've got a purpose. I've got things that have been left unfinished, and I'm ready to go back.
I was going to ask you that. What made you make that decision to come back? Was there something that was really pulling you to come back?
I can't say that there was one specific thing that was pulling me. I just knew I had work to do. I can't say there was one specific thing that was saying, oh, you need to come back and have kids, or you need to come back and be a life coach, or you need to come back and do this. It was more like, you know, the people that were standing on that platform at the top of those wooden stairs, I think that may have been an indication that somehow I needed to reach people, and these people may be adults, they may be children, maybe the silhouette of the children were my kids. I don't know, but that doesn't matter to me at this point.
I've got a picture here that I was going to pull up that I always, if it will pull up. When I was working with families, I would always visualize this, like this, you know, this gal here laying on the bed, and how the people in the physical are grieving the loss, but the people on the other side of the veil were welcoming, you know, them in. So it's like that picture, I always have that visual of when someone was passing on, that they were being greeted, you know, on the other side, whether that be angels or loved ones or light beings or whatever it may be. But you know, as time went on, I started to witness some of those, you know, things that you talked about, like having the angel there or some sort of presence there with you, and recognizing that. And, you know, there were times when I was in the room when it sounds like, when in the beginning of your story, when you said there was a lot of noise and chaos and things, you know, working in a hospital setting, they were probably coding you, and, you know, just, it's all trauma. It's, you know, everything that you were in the trauma room. And that's probably what was happening, is that they were just hooking you up to all these machines and making sure your vital signs were, you know, stable. And, you know, so it's interesting that you had the experience where you could sense it from the bed, but also from above. That's really interesting. I've never heard that, you know.
A lot of screaming and yelling, a lot of don't stop breathing, don't stop breathing. This is going to hurt. This is going to hurt. Stay with us. Stay with us. At the time, they didn't know my name. So they weren't able to say, Ryan, you know, we need you to breathe. We need you to breathe. I was titled Trauma Victor. So
yeah, I was going to say, you're probably a doe.
I love that name, Trauma Victor, which is exactly what it ended up being. You know?
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, it's funny you say that, because I think there's a synchronicity with that. I had, you know, many does that would come in, and then we'd finally get their name, you know, after a while. But, you know, one guy had fallen out of a tree and he was Timber Doe. And, you know, I mean, just kind of funny how they will, you know, name you, but it's not based off of your accident. It's actually an alphabetical kind of algorithm, how
like
they pick. So it's funny that you had that.
It's like the hurricanes that we give names to that come off of the East Coast. It just starts with A and it goes through the alphabet. So being at V, apparently there were several that night. I don't know, but yeah, it was really fascinating to hear all of that from below, as though I was on that bed, but to be observing it from above.
And not to feel the pain either. That's really interesting.
And not to feel the pain.
I noticed that with some of my clients that have suffered a very severe trauma, is oftentimes it's like their consciousness or their soul will exit their physical body. And it's almost like a trauma response that we go through. It's like we can't handle the physical pain, so we just shoot out of the body. And oftentimes we need to pull ourselves back in. But in your situation, you were in so much pain, you know, and suffering based off of the accident, that you were completely in another realm or another consciousness state, you know. And it sounds like it was like you were kind of going over a life plan, you know, like, do I want to, as a soul, do I want to come back into the body and experience the earthly realm, or am I ready to move on into my next, you know, my next stage? And so when you decided to make the decision to come back into your body, you know, back to the earth, do you remember anything were you in a coma at that time, or did you wake up, you know, at that moment?
That's a great question. And that's something I have yet to find out. I don't know if that particular moment when I made that decision to come back happened the second I was ejected and hit the ground, or if that happened 4 weeks into my comatose.
Interesting.
I don't know when that took place, But I do know that once I was released and came out of that comatose, it was rather quick that I was able to sit up and then lay back down. And then the
Mhm.
next day I would sit up, roll my feet over, put my feet on the ground, and then I was exhausted and I laid back down. And that was a difficult time for me because now I'm conscious again. I'm back in this earth reality
Uh-huh.
going, I hurt. My whole body hurts. What's happened? And I don't remember the out of body experience until later on.
Later on.
Yeah.
So when you were in the coma, do you remember anything from being in the coma? Do you remember hearing voices or people talking or anything? Because I've talked to a lot of different patients who have come out of a coma and they remember, conversations that happened in the room or whatnot. So I'm just curious if you remember any of that.
Yeah, I remember. So my hospital room was right next to the helicopter landing pad. So I remember hearing the helicopter take off and land quite often throughout the day. I also remember hearing voices of some loved ones that were around me. Um, and even I could feel the touch sometimes, and not so much the physical skin to skin touch, but when my feet were touched, which I later found out my mom would often touch my feet, I couldn't feel the skin to skin, but I could feel her energy. I could
Mhm.
feel her energy entering
Essence.
into my body,
Mhm.
and I knew that I was being touched. I knew when people were talking to me. I don't remember specific things that were said, but I knew people were communicating to me, and I wanted so badly to be able to communicate back to them, but I couldn't. I
Yeah.
couldn't speak. So that was frustrating, and I think that's kind of when that transition was taking place, where I was, I don't know whether I immediately came back into my body or I slowly came back, or if it was just slowly coming out of the comatose. I was able to start identifying pain and hearing sounds and hearing people. It's a lot of it is still a bit unknown to me.
Yeah. And that's what it sounds like, because it's almost like, as time goes on, pieces of that experience continue to come back and you're like, "Oh, I remember that," or I remember that, and how does that experience? And I know with me, I would always tell the families if their loved ones were unconscious to continue to talk to them and to
Absolutely.
touch
Absolutely.
them and to let them know that you're there, because I would even have, when we would have conversations, I would ask the staff to, let's go stand outside of the room, because, you don't want to be talking about that stuff in front of the patient if
Right.
they really can hear you. But it's almost like locked in syndrome, where you're sensing that there's conversations about you happening around
You
you, but you can't
absolutely are. I mean,
speak.
there is energy moving around inside of that room, and you
Mhm.
can sense those kinds of things. You can feel them. So I felt love. I felt some fright. Clearly my family was terrified of what was
Mhm.
going on. But yes, they know you are there.
That's
I
awesome.
knew they were there, and I could feel them communicating to me, although I always did not know what they were saying, but it gave me strength.
I love that, Ryan. That's such a confirmation for people who are going through this. And me working with those patients in the ICU for all those years. And it was like, on our side, we can't really put, scientifically prove that you can understand or hear or sense or know that we're there. But what we can really do is just be there and have that presence and that loving, talk and in touch for that. So I love that you validated that specifically with your personal experience,
Yeah,
because
and anybody that
as a
needs
nursing staff, you can't really scientifically prove that they can hear,
so anybody that's dealing with that, any medical professionals out there, nurses, family, or whatever, if you've got somebody in that place, touch them,
Mhm.
talk to them,
Comfort
pray
them.
with them, whatever it
Mhm.
is that you do it to them as though they are awake and alive, because they will feel it.
And I love that because, uh, I witnessed that many times, that spontaneous remission with people. Like we'd have the family around the bedside and they would be praying, and we call the chaplain in, and then we would notice some movements, with the patient. And sometimes they weren't movements that were going to bring them back to life, but they could be just movements of, I acknowledge that you're here and that you're with me and that you're praying. And then we also had other patients where they had that spontaneous remission where they, kind of just came back, with no known reason or cause. They just, sat up in the bed after a coma for 2 or 3 weeks. And then they were like eating and drinking and talking. And you're like, holy cow, So I do feel, and that's where that Maharishi effect, for those of, listeners, go dive a little bit into the rabbit hole about the Maharishi effect. It's when you have a group of people that come together with a very focused intention or prayer, and they can shift and transform energy, and I witnessed this in Florida when I lived in Florida during the Category 5 hurricane. I would notice large groups of people going to the east coast of Florida, praying and sending energy that it would move, and it would. It went to the other side of the state, and then the people on that side of the state would start praying and sending energy, and it would move. And so there was so much confusion. I can't even remember the name of the hurricane, but there was so much confusion with it because no one knew where it was going. But a lot of it, I think, had to do with the direct intention of everybody's energy, just moving it and focusing it. And we can do that with our loved ones. It's so powerful when we put our intention towards a common focused goal or intent. And I witnessed that several times. So I think, just having it from your perspective, it's so validating and clarifying, to kind of see what I would see, and then what you were experiencing on the death side.
Right. And I think that we can send that energy to people, whether they're family or friends or loved ones, or even people that we don't know.
Whether they're in the room or not, or in the vicinity or not.
In the entanglement theory, to where there was at one point, we were all connected at one point, whether that was 10 billion years ago or whatever. If you believe in the Big Bang theory, we were all entangled in this massive ball of energy, and we were there, and it exploded. And so we remain connected all the time. And so my grandparents had several churches praying for me, and I'm not a religious person, but it's what their intention was.
Yes.
And there were lots of people that were praying and coming together and sending that healing energy my way. And I absolutely can attribute, part of this success to those people and the energy that they were giving out to me.
I love that. And I think a lot of it too is visualizing your loved one sitting up, walking out of the bed, and, really seeing them living their best life. And I think that can really play into that healing process as well. It's just really visualizing that. And I think too, being realistic, in the moment of what's happening, but also because we would get families that were the opposite. They just weren't grasping the concept that their loved one was, really dire, but then there were certain circumstances where like yours, where they're in a coma. It's like, focus on them waking up, and talking to you and sitting up in the bed and taking a drink. So, let's talk about that. When you finally came back into your body, whatever time that was, and you sat up and you were able to sit up in bed, what was that experience like when you finally recognized that you were back in your physical body?
Yeah, so I was extremely confused. I was lost. I had no idea where I was, and I had 1,000 questions. I still couldn't communicate, so I would communicate by writing on a piece of paper. And as you can imagine, it was very difficult to read that writing for my family. But for whatever reason, they figured it out. I mean, they would kind of give me feedback and ask questions like, Ryan, is this what you're wanting to know? And I could shake my head yes or no. I was able to, kind of like what I was touching on earlier, I was able to move my body a little bit and sit up, and then I would lay down because I was exhausted. I hadn't moved for weeks and weeks. And then I would get up, put my feet on the ground. The nurses would help me up. Maybe I would take 2 or 3 steps. They'd sit me back down and I would sleep again for hours. And this just kind of went on. But I believe it was over the course of about 3 or 4 days that I was able to stand up and walk far enough down the hall, being, assisted by nurses, that they sent me to another hospital for rehabilitation.
Wow.
So from the time I woke up to the time I left was about 3 days.
Oh my goodness. That's pretty significant. And you were in a coma for how long did you say?
6 weeks.
Wow. That's
I was ready to
impressive.
come back. I was ready.
Yeah.
I knew there was
And you're like, all right, I'm ready for this. I'm ready for this mission. I understand what I'm going to need to go through. So what were your thoughts? What was going on in your mind about your healing process? How were you moving through that? Were you thinking about it, or were you just pushing through, or what,
Yeah.
how were you processing? I'm going to stand up and walk. This is not going to defeat me.
Yeah, I didn't really have that mindset at first. I was very infantile. It was almost like, whatever I need to do, just tell me what to do. But at the same time, I was a bit combative because of the head injury that I had sustained. A lot of times head injury patients become combative. And
Absolutely.
so I
Mhm.
was very resistant. And this is just, me being human again, like I don't know what's wrong with me. And, we need to put you in physical therapy to learn to walk again. We need to make sure you can eat again on your own. And for me, it was frustrating because I was beginning to kind of remember, wait a minute, I know how to eat. I know how to walk. What's going on here? But when I would try to do that on my own, I couldn't. So frustration would set in, and I really developed a strong relationship with all the hospital staff at the rehab that I was at, because they were just so kind and considerate and compassionate, and their hearts were so in it to help me, and they understood. It was just that was amazing. And to go back and visit those people is just awesome. I haven't done it for a while, but I made it a point for several years to go back and thank them, because I couldn't walk really on my own, and they were teaching me how to do that. And they would give me, $5 and say, okay, Ryan, we want you to take this $5 and walk down to the grocery store, make a purchase, make sure you get the right change back, and then walk back.
That's
And of
awesome.
course, my family is just going, oh my God, no, don't send him out on his own. He's been in a coma for 6 weeks. We can't do that to him. And they're like, no, he needs to do this, And so I felt very supported by my tribe, my family, the hospital staff. But at the very same time, I felt very alone. Like,
Mhm.
this is my journey and I need to overcome this. And if it takes me 5 years, so be it. If it takes me 6 months, that's fine. But this is where I'm focused right now.
Yeah, and I can't imagine how frustrating that must have been. It's like your mind knows how to do it, but your body's not cooperating. It's like it's
Right.
not following through. So it's almost like you've got your mind like, okay, I can eat, I can use the bathroom, I can, pick up a toothbrush, but my body is not responding in the way
Right.
that my mind is responding. And that's got to be so frustrating. It's like there's a disconnect there.
There is definitely a disconnect. Thinking that I need to go to the bathroom, I can just get up and walk and go into the bathroom and the bedpan fills up. And it's like,
Mhm.
oh, I can't go in and do that yet.
Yeah. And so, okay, so, once you got out of there for in 3 days after you were in a 6-week coma, 3 days, and then you're in rehab. So walk us through rehab. How was that? What was that experience like?
Yeah, that was the most difficult part for me, was the rehabilitation. It was painful. Um, learning to walk again and learning to eat again, and being able to communicate again vocally. Um, I sounded different. I didn't feel like I sounded the same. I didn't speak the same as I did before. I know I looked different. I didn't look in the mirror for a long time. And then when I finally did, I had kind of those big bug eyes, from the head injury. And I had lost, I don't know, 40 pounds probably. So I felt frail. But I felt a lot of love and compassion from the people that were helping me, and I really leaned on them for that. And having my family there every single day was just unreal. I owe so much to them for being there to support me. But the struggle began for me in rehabilitation. That was the hardest part.
And how long did the rehab last? I mean, well, and I'm sure it continues on,
Yeah. So the full rehabilitation went on for probably a year and a half. I was actually inpatient for, I believe, a month before
Oh,
they would
wow.
actually let me go and I could, get out on my own. And then, of course, when I got out on my own, it was not going back to my apartment. I went to live with my parents, and that was a struggle. They were really concerned about things. I'm like, I wanted to take a shower. They wouldn't let me shower by myself for fear of me falling or hitting my head, things like that. And, I remember there did come a point, and it wasn't from my higher self. It was from my ego, that I was sitting on the front porch with my parents, and my body was broken. I was exhausted, and I questioned, why was I kept alive? Why did I choose this? Because this is a living hell. This is brutal to have to fight through this, but I was always reminded that you've got a purpose. Remember your why, Ryan. There's a reason why, and you're going to get through this, and you're going to impact others, and you will have a message and a story to tell. And so I think that's where I really started to learn to stay present in the moment and accept the moment for the way it was.
Yeah. And it's like, it's really hard to do that when you're in pain, right? And when you're suffering, it's like you just want it to go away. You want it to stop. You want things to go back to normal, and to really, honor that, and to consciously understand that I've got to just be in the present moment. I have to accept where I am. I have to accept that how far I've come. I mean, my goodness, between the time you woke up from the coma to the time you're in rehab, this, to me, seeing a lot of patients that had gone through this, you were making pretty fast strides, I think, just based off of the circumstances. So you may not have seen that in the moment, but I think your staff, like the ones who are caring for you, were like, you're doing awesome, because
miraculous. I heard the word miraculous so many times come from my doctors and the hospital staff, that, Ryan, this is just unbelievable. And if my family was sitting here also, they would be like, yeah, it was unbelievable. I mean, 3 weeks ago, they were telling us to get our house ADA accessible for him, because we don't know if he's going to be in a wheelchair or what. And now 3 weeks later, I'm in a rehabilitation, walking around and moving. And yeah, it was things. When I look back at it now, yeah, things were moving quick, like extremely quick. But at that time, it was very slow. And I don't know, maybe it was because I learned to stay in the present moment at that time. And, I've got to accept where I'm at right now. I cannot wish to be somewhere else, because that's not where I am. This is where I'm at. I know where I want to go, and I'm going there. But in that journey, during that process, I'm staying present all the way through.
That's amazing. And so now this is kind of a question that I want to ask you, because I'm curious in myself, because I used to witness this specifically around patients kind of similar to your situation, where they were being coded or resuscitated. I was noticing like a mist leaving the body, and then once they were resuscitated, I would notice a mist kind of coming back into the body. as I started to research this more, and I started to go through my quantum healing hypnosis training, learning a little bit more about Dolores Cannon and some of her teachings, she talks about a concept called a walk-in soul. And so I'm curious, and I would notice this, and they often say sometimes this will happen. It's almost like people make a soul contract that I'm going to, a portion of, this soul is going to walk through life to this extent, and then this event is going to happen, and then a new soul or another soul will enter the body, or the avatar, so to speak, and continue on through the process. So times when this could happen are through near-death experiences, through codes, resuscitations, even when babies are born. This was something that we had talked about on my last podcast. So I'm curious if, number one, you're aware of this concept, and number two, did you notice a difference in your being or your soul or consciousness prior to this accident and then after the accident? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I would say shortly after the accident, even though I felt really beat up and broken and I had been through a lot of trauma, I did feel brand new.
Mm-hmm.
I felt brand new. There was something different in me. And, I would hear a lot of people say, Ryan suffered some head injury and we don't really know what he's going to be like.
Uh-huh.
And, you're going to have to give this a couple of years before we truly know what he's going to be like. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, you guys sit and observe, but there's definitely something that has changed in me, and so as far as, go back to the original question that you had. There was two parts to that question. The other one,
two parts. Do you know what a walk-in? Have you heard of that concept of a walk-in soul? Was my first question.
Maybe not in that term. So maybe if you could explain that a little more.
Yeah. So basically the way she explains it is, instead of the body dying or the vessel dying, it's like a soul contract where, two different souls want to experience life here on Earth. So it's like one soul will live the life all the way up until, say, the car accident. And then that's when they exit out. And then a new soul will say, okay, I'm ready. It's almost like a relay race, like a tag team. Like, okay, now I'm going to come back in and live the rest of the life, rather than the way she explains it. It's rather than just killing off the vessel or the body, the physical body. It's just
so there's an
kind of bringing in two different consciousnesses. And this is where there's also that concept where different consciousness can come in when someone has some sort of a near-death experience or a loss of consciousness. Other souls can kind of enter the vessel, to experience,
Yeah. So I would say when that happened and I exited my body, I definitely absorbed other energies while I was gone.
That was going to be a question of mine too. Did you recognize that, and did you notice that, from the other side?
Yeah. So I think, because it was so peaceful, I think there was nothing but love and light during that time. And I think at that time I was being recalibrated or rejuvenated, and I was being given everything that I need at that point so I could return and carry out my mission, carry out the rest of my contract.
That's awesome. And because I have, spoken to people where their loved ones noticed a significant difference in the person. Like, before an accident, they weren't living their life the way they should have been. Maybe they were into drugs and alcohol or, whatnot. And then after their accident, it was like they were a completely different person. And that's where maybe that concept of a walk-in could come into place, because you've got two different consciousness or two different souls wanting to experience two different perspectives.
I wouldn't say I have a different consciousness though, because I can I'm more conscious. So because I can remember my childhood, I can remember everything in this current life.
That's cool.
Space and time that I'm living in now. So I don't feel like a new consciousness entered me, but an expanded consciousness. That was like given to me for me to come back.
So with that said, how, after this accident and all of this experience, how do you see death now? How do you look back at death? Because I want to talk a little bit about this, because working in death and loss, I noticed a lot of fear around death and people just terrified of crossing over. And, fear of the unknown, I guess. So is there anything that you can share that would help enlighten people about the death process that could help them have a little bit more ease,
Yeah,
and comfort around that topic?
sure. So my personal opinion is the reason people fear death is because they're not living. They're not living to their full potential. They're not making that life adventurous. They're not making it exciting. They may feel like they're in a robotic state, just get up, go to work, come home, go to bed. They're existing.
Yes. They're an
So
autopilot.
if
Hmm.
you're here to simply exist, which you're not, I'm here to tell all of you listening, you're not here to simply exist. But if you're in that mindset of just existing, you're more likely to fear death because you're leaving behind a lot of potential.
Absolutely.
So
Hmm.
I don't fear death anymore. And I would say
You've
it's
been there, done that, right?
I've been there and I've done that. Right. Yeah. I would say that's part of it. But I would also say it's because I'm living now.
Hmm.
I'm living now. And I would smother that with gratitude. Gratitude, I believe, is such a powerful emotion. And it's often something that we have to choose. And even the simplest things to be grateful for, the warmth of the sun, the oxygen that we have to breathe, right? Just being grateful for all of these things and staying present, knowing that, this human body that we're in is going to expire. And I personally don't want to be on my deathbed again going, I wish I would have done this. I
Hmm.
wished I would have done that. They did a study a while back that, they talked to people that were on their deathbed and they asked them the top 3 to 5 things. And it was never, that they regretted or that they wished that they had done or whatever. And it was never what they did do. It was always what they didn't do, was always in the top 1 or 2 answers of all these people that are facing death. I would also point out that I think in a lot of cases, when those of us that are standing bedside next to somebody that is dying, if you notice, once they have accepted it, they're quite peaceful.
Hmm.
And it's us that are standing bedside that are panicking and we're in chaos and we're so worried about losing this person. And they're just relaxed and, calm and at peace, and they've accepted it. So I have a completely different relationship with death now. I see death as a new beginning,
Uh-huh.
not only for me, but even for those that are left behind. What are they going to do with their lives at this point?
Hmm.
You know,
I love that. And I think that's such an important point to touch on, is that one thing that I would notice witnessing all of the death that I did is that, like you said, I worked at hospice for many years too. So I would ask people at their bedside, what was it? What are some things that you can teach me, or some lessons? And like you said, most of them talked about things that they didn't get a chance, to do. And I also would witness loved ones who had been estranged or separated from the person who was dying. And at the time of, many hours before time of death, they were just pleading for them to not die, or forgiving them in that moment, or, whatever it may be. So I think it's important for people to, kind of listen to that information and take it upon yourself to make amends now. Don't wait until the time of death to, have these conversations when someone is at the bedside,
right.
and, live your life now to the fullest. And also, one thing too, Ryan, I think is important for people, if you are, struggling with someone who is passing away and they don't seem to be moving on, or they might be stuck, give them permission to move on, give
Yeah.
them permission to pass. And this was something that I would notice a lot, is that oftentimes the people who were in, the patient in the bed was holding on. They were holding on
There
because
were
they
things that
were,
were incomplete that
yes,
needed to
they
be
felt like there was
completed.
something incomplete, and they wanted to make sure that their loved ones who were left behind were going to be okay.
Yeah.
And oftentimes us as the living will anchor or tether them here. And we have to not only process, the fact that it's okay for us to let them go and their memory will still live on in our hearts, but we have to give them permission to go too, because
Mhm.
they will hold on and
Mhm.
they'll anchor themselves here. So I love that you brought that up, because that happened specifically with me and my 91-year-old grandmother. She wanted to pass so badly, and she was verbalizing it to us. But I told my dad, you need to give her permission. You need to tell her it's okay. We're going to be okay. Go to the other side, go to the light. And within hours, she was gone. It was like
Mhm.
a
Yeah,
relief,
that's
for her.
beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful. And you had mentioned uncertainty. I think we build lives with the illusion that we have certainty,
Mm-hmm.
and there is no certainty. Learning to live in uncertainty is a very empowering mindset to have, because the certainty that we think we have is an illusion, and it's really based around control. And so surrendering to that, and because we don't know when our time's going to come.
Mm-hmm.
We have no idea. Even death is uncertain. And I think that's another thing that people fear. They're uncertain of when that day is going to come. And that's fearful for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
So
And then they don't live their lives out of fear.
right. Live every day. Make every day an alive day, and fill it with gratitude and compassion and love for people, because it can be struck down and taken from you immediately so fast. I was fortunate enough to not, many people die on impact, and
Mm-hmm.
it's over. It's done. I was fortunate enough to be able to choose to come back,
Yeah.
and that doesn't happen for everybody.
It doesn't. And I think, that's what's so difficult, at least working on the hospital side, is that you hear these family stories that yesterday we were having dinner and now today he's in the ICU and he's in a coma, and it's like, what's the worst case scenario? Watching someone, with cancer slowly progress to death, or watching someone have a traumatic experience and then they're gone within
Right.
seconds to hours to days. I don't think either one of them is a good choice. But when you live your life to the fullest and recognize that your life can be taken in the blink of an eye, then we really, do. It's like you live like you're dying. It's like, if tomorrow's your last day, go out and live the way that you want to live. And when you're in that state of alignment, you're in alignment with your soul, you align with your purpose. Because I think a lot of people are like, what's my purpose? Why am I here? I don't understand. That seems to be a common question for me amongst my clients, is what is
Yeah,
my purpose? And
same
your
here.
purpose is to live. Your purpose is to live your life from your heart and from
That
your
is your
soul.
purpose. And a lot of my clients look for, what is my purpose in life right now? I'm like, well, number one, it's to live. And I also believe that it's extremely important that if you don't know what your purpose is, then just live intentionally.
Yes.
Live with intention and do some self-inventory. What is your intention? What do you want to leave? How do you want to live? What is it that you want people to remember of you? And live in alignment with yourself. Don't live for anybody else. So many people find their identity in their marriages, in their churches, in their jobs. Throw that all aside. That's just a role that you're playing right now. Get inside yourself and then live in alignment with what sets you on fire.
Yes. And live in alignment with joy and happiness, because when you're doing things that bring you joy and happiness, you're automatically in alignment with your heart and your soul. And I think that's it too, is people question, well, is this my purpose or is this my purpose? And I always say back, how does it feel? Does it feel good? If
Yeah.
it feels good, then it's your purpose.
Yeah.
If it makes you
Awesome.
joyful and blissful,
And I
then
would
it's your
add that,
purpose.
and I would add to that that I believe we are joy. We are joy. And I think happiness is fleeting. I think happiness comes and goes just like sadness does, just like anger does, and
Mhm.
anxiety. Those things come and go. So if something makes you happy, wonderful. Know that suffering still exists. It's
Mhm.
going to be there. So you can either suffer joyously or you can suffer miserably, because
Very
there's
true.
going to be suffering. And I personally don't necessarily chase happiness. I try and integrate everything together. The suffering I welcome because it's there to teach me something. It's
Uh-huh.
it's landed in my emotions for a reason. Same with anxiety and depression or sadness and happiness, right? It's
It's a
all
choice.
there
Mhm.
for a reason. But remember that you are joy. That is what you are. When you were born, joy was born with you.
Yeah, it's a frequency, it's a vibration, and
Right.
tapping into that frequency of joy, and you can definitely sense when you're in those stages of suffering or sadness or loss or grief, you're in a different vibrational state.
Mhm.
You can definitely sense that. And so it's just really, noticing the contrast between the two and recognizing that when are in those lower vibrational states, there's a reason for it,
Mhm.
and you're learning lessons, and you're having a deeper understanding, and you're expanding your consciousness, and recognizing that, okay, I wouldn't be able to experience joy if I didn't be able to experience death or sadness or
Bingo.
loss, because there needs to be a contrast there, so you can kind of use that as a litmus test, so to speak, to be like, okay, I know what suffering feels like and I know what joy feels like. Which one feels better to me, and where do I want to be? And when I'm in those lower states of frequency or vibration, just not getting hung up on them, but working through them and
Right.
processing them
And
and
not
allowing that
resisting them.
energy to move through.
Yeah, not resisting them. I think a lot of people spend a good amount of their time resisting negative emotions. And when
Yes.
you resist them, you're giving power to them. And
Mhm.
it is emotion. And our thoughts and our emotions are energy. And when
Yes.
we resist it, we give power to it. So rather than resisting it, surrender to it, listen to it. It's got a message for you. Hold on to it and then blossom from it.
So true. And it's like when you're in those states of pain, and I know for me, I had, when I moved across the country all by myself and I was changing my whole life, it was like I shifted timelines significantly. I went through a tremendous amount of pain in my lower back, when I got out here, and I knew that it was emotional. I knew there was a reason. I was feeling unsupported. I was feeling alone. There was just a lot of emotions that I know were processing through me, almost like a sifting when you're sifting for gold. It was like I
Mhm.
was sifting through all the muck, to get to that golden nugget. And all I could do was, and probably similar to you, all I could do is really just lay in bed and process, how do I feel right now? And I don't think a lot of people take the time to do that. In our modern day society, we like to distract. We like to not turn our head and look at the pain. We want to avoid the pain, or we want to numb the pain, or we want to, somehow coat over the pain. But really looking at the pain head on and listening to your body, and asking your body, why is this here? What is this? Is this physical? Is this emotional? Is this mental? Is this spiritual? What aspect of this pain am I meant to learn from? And for me,
It's
it was,
stepping into your shadow. It's stepping into that
yes.
and not being afraid of it. There's a story about a man who was so afraid of his shadow that he decided to run from it. And he ran and he ran and he ran as fast as he could. And every time he turned around, his footsteps were right behind him. His shadow was following him. And so his resolution to this was, well, I'll just run faster. And he kept running and running until he dropped dead. And if he only would have known that if he would have stepped into the shadow, stepped into the shade, sat down and sat still with it, that shadow would have dissolved, that
Dissolved.
it
Hmm.
would have been gone.
Yeah. So it's like just turning around and facing it, facing that emotion, surrendering to it. And like you said, emotions are energy in motion. That's
Mhm.
exactly what they are. And, instead of running from them or numbing them or pushing them down like a pressure cooker, if they're going to bubble to the surface,
What
they're
happens
going
to
to come
energy? What happens to energy? When it's held, energy expands.
out.
That's science. Energy will expand. And it
And it never dies. It always transforms
it always
into something.
transforms, right? And so you can suppress neglect, and that energy will expand and surface as anger.
hmm And it's like layers to an onion. It's like, you kind of peel away. Okay, there's anger there, but what is the really deep underlying emotion or issue there? It could be abandonment, rejection,
Yeah, dive heart
whatever it
first
may be.
into that.
hmm
Dive heart first into those feelings.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. So I think we touched on a lot of different topics, and there was one other topic I was curious about. After you experienced all of this, did you notice any dreams? Did any information come to you through your dream state after you had experienced this trauma?
Not immediately after, but I would say over the past 5 to 7 years, um, I have awesome dreams. Yeah, I believe in other dimensions, and I believe that during our dreams are almost a parallel universe that we're actually living in. And
hmm
I experience certain things from there. I gather a lot of information from my dreams, and I apply them here today. I believe I have guides out there and angels that are watching over me. And during my dream state, while my ego is asleep, I get downloads and
Uh-huh.
throughout the night, So, but I didn't have any. I guess there were some pretty traumatic times where I had some maybe flashbacks or reliving of the situation of the accident. Um, but yeah, I would say that's about the bulk of the dreams.
Yeah.
The dreams I have now are very intentional, and they come from a much higher place.
That's cool. I was just curious if you had any healing dreams or anything like that. When I worked in organ donation, when I was there with the patient who the family had, chosen for them to be an organ donor, I would notice sometimes after they would pass, they would come to me in my dreams with messages and information. And so that's when I started to realize death is not the end all be all. There's
Mhm.
another side, to this perspective, because I was getting information from them. And at the time, I just was kind of pushing it to the side because I'm like, oh no, that can't be a message, whatever. But then as time went on, there was one specific family that their loved one had come through to me, and it was a year later, and I had met up with them, and I had just nonchalantly shared that I had had a dream, and the mother her face just went blank, and she's like, I really needed that information. Thank you for sharing that with me. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'd been holding on to that for a year, not even really recognizing that their loved one was sending a message through me,
Yes.
to them. So I know for me, dreams are huge messengers, and when it comes through, and I'm like you, I have amazing dreams. I always joke, I came to earth and I am like, I can dream like nobody's business. Like sleeping and dreaming, I'm really good at it. I must be really good at multitasking in other realms and whatnot.
Yeah.
But
Well, and I think that's what we do when we dream. I think we go to a different dimension,
yes.
and we can
And
receive a lot of information there and bring it back and apply it here.
yeah, and that's fascinating. So, Ryan, is there anything else that you'd like to share, with the audience about, pertaining to your experience, or just anything in general that you think the audience would benefit from?
No, I mean, I'm just super grateful to be here. Um, it's just amazing for me to be able to share my story with you. Thank you so much for having me on your show. And I would just say, be sure to live alive. That's what it's all about, is to live alive, and live every day as though it's your last.
That's awesome. So, share a little bit with us about Blue Moments Coaching and how people can reach out to you if they resonated with this and they, want to learn more.
Yeah, sure. So I've been coaching professionally and with the certification for the last 5 years. I offer one-on-one coaching. There's 2 and 3 month programs that I offer. It's a very intimate, safe environment that I be sure to create for my clients. You can find me on Facebook, Ryan Gardner, or Facebook, Blue Moments Coaching, either one. And yeah, it's my calling, it's my passion, and I absolutely love what I do.
That's awesome. And I'll leave all your information below on both the podcast and the video, so that way people can easily, reach out to you. And I thank you so much, Ryan, for being vulnerable enough to share your story and to really give us a new, fresh perspective on death and loss, and, to really just to have some comfort in knowing that after we pass on in the physical, that there's more, there's more out there, and that this isn't the end all be all here. And that I think a good takeaway that both you and I have sort of emphasized is to just live your life and live it to the fullest, the best way that you can, because we just don't know what tomorrow's going to bring.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You deserve to navigate your life as an empath in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT tapping, and the Emotion Code, visit my website at www.thesoulcafe.org.